Thanks for joining us. This panel is called Advocacy Begins at Home. My name is John Hoffman. I'm the Director of Advocacy at FAIR, and we have three great FAIR advocates who are going to talk about their personal journey in advocacy. But specifically, I think the goal of this is to make people understand how your local and personal actions that you take on behalf of yourself or your family or your children constitutes advocacy already. Sometimes people don't know that they advocate or that they're advocates, or when they're asked, what does advocacy mean? Sometimes it's hard to define. But this session is meant to sort of make that a little bit more simple and make you understand that you're probably already doing it. And legislative advocacy is just one more step. So I'm going to go around the room here and introduce you, or allow everyone to introduce themselves on the panel. Stacey, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Stacey Saiontz, and I'm the mother of a boy who's now 13 who has life-threatening allergies to dairy, egg, wheat, oat, rye, barley, tree nuts, sesame, sorghum, millet, teff, quinoa, buckwheat, chia, flax, sunflower, amongst other things. And I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you. Heather?
Sure. My name's Heather Gass. I am also a food allergy mom, and I also have food allergies myself. And my son is allergic to sesame, and that's kind of what's brought me into advocacy here.
Great. Thank you. Jill?
My name is Jill Mindlin, and I am the mother of a 19-year-old who, until just recently, was anaphylactic to dairy, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, and sesame seeds. She's worked with some studies to outgrow some of those allergies through oral immunotherapy. But I became involved in this when she was 9 months old and had her first reaction. So I've been doing this for a while.
Well, let's level set. I'll start with Stacey. Let's talk about how your advocacy journey began.
So I think my advocacy journey began by just educating the nursery school that my son was attending and educating all of his friends and his friends' parents on how to best keep him safe. And then actually I had, during those early years, I was at a birthday party for my older son, and the grandfather of the boy whose birthday party it was happened to be a state legislator. And I was thinking, forward that my son was going to eventually go to elementary school, and I was worried that the teachers weren't educated on how to recognize a reaction and how to treat it, if they hadn't been trained yet. And so I proposed to him an idea I had about a bill, and he said, draft it up and come meet with me. And so that was my first introduction to actually meeting with a state legislator.
Would you have considered yourself an advocate before your son was born?
No, I thought I was just, being a mother, trying to make sure that when he was on a play date and other kids were putting toys in their mouth before he touched them because they might have just eaten something, he was allergic to, that I'd wipe it down. And just by educating others, I just thought I was, being maybe an overprotective mother, but just being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Heather, how did your advocacy journey begin?
Sure. So I've had a tree nut allergy for my whole life, and similar to Stacey, I didn't really think of myself as an advocate until my son was diagnosed. He had his first reaction when he was 6 months old to peanut, and then milk followed, and then sesame was right after that. So I kind of went through the same process. It was learning how to be an advocate for my son in daycare. My parents also watch my son a couple days a week, so learning how to talk to them about food allergy. I mean, I had dealt with it my whole life, but it was definitely different looking at, between the two generations of how things have changed and how much more allergies are recognized. So I think that was like my first foray into it. And then, with the sesame diagnosis, I heard about the FASTER Act, and that's when I started getting involved with FAIR. And that's just kind of led me to also getting involved at the state level. We've had some issues with, with our daycare center and just making sure that keep my son safe. So that's when I started reaching out to my state legislators at that point.
Great. Jill, same question.
Very similar answer. I would not have considered myself an advocate before my daughter was born, but I mean, well, I'm an attorney, so I guess by definition, I'm an advocate, but I don't think of it that way. But in terms of an advocate for people's rights, so my daughter was born, I had a 2-year-old at the time who did not have any allergies, and I referred to him as my starter kid because he would get me in the door of everywhere that she was going to be going 2 years later. So that, for example, when he was in nursery school, I immediately joined the nursery school board, because that way I could have 2 years to get the nursery school ready for her, and then the elementary school board and the middle school and high school and so forth. So I always had 2 years lead time for each different stage of her life. And, but much like the other moms, the advocacy really began very locally, just, her teacher or her play date's mom, that sort of thing. So you don't realize you're an advocate, but you're already doing it.
So I wanted to talk about sort of the progression as this goes. Stacey, I think you're the best one to start with this as sort of how you had your chance encounter with a state legislator. I think that's a interesting foray. That's not what most people, how the door knows not normally open for most people that way, but I think that's a good way to start. I want to talk about the difference between your first meeting and then your second meeting and your third meeting. I think that's important because I think a lot of people that are listening today, if they've not done it before, they're bringing in a lot of anxiety. They're bringing in a lot of feelings of maybe that I'm not qualified to speak about this, or I don't, who am I? Well, I'm just a parent. So talk about the difference between that first meeting and then sort of your level of comfort and confidence as you kept going.
I remember I was extremely nervous for my first meeting. I prepared, I was practicing my speech on my husband and my parents. And, I was very, very nervous. But then when you realize what you're doing is you're just educating another person about a situation that you're living and that so many other people like you are living, and educating a person who has the power to make your situation and other people's situations safer and more inclusive. And so I think, I was so nervous about meeting with the state legislator, but then when you get down to it and you realize this is just another person, who can actually help the situation, and you're having a conversation and you're providing information to them to help them do their job. So each conversation got easier. I mean, I can't say that I still do get nervous every time, but it's definitely smoother.
Sure. I'm like I'm sure that when there's interviews where people who do Broadway still say that before the shows to get nervous. But if you've done a meeting 1,000 times, your 1,001st one, you're like, well, I still don't want to screw this up. So I still want to be prepared and say what I'm saying. Heather, let's talk about how you've sort of transitioned your first, I think I'm right. Your first legislative meeting was it for Fast Track? Was that the first time you did it? And then you've had, or have you done stuff before that as well?
I did one right before that, actually. I think it was probably, 2019. I had met with one of my congresswoman's local staff member here in New Hampshire. And she was one of the first co-sponsors of the FASTER Act. And, I wanted to just start getting involved. And, I reached out and set up a meeting with the local office right here in my local area, and just met with her and said, I'm so excited that she's sponsored the legislation. I'd like to share my story, because it really just started with, I filled out the form on the website and said, I'd really be excited for you to sponsor this legislation. I put a little bit of my personal story, but not very much. And so when I got a message back saying that she co-sponsored, I was just like, okay, this is great. I've made some progress. Let's keep the relationship going. So, I was still super nervous going in. I had a couple sheets of paper with the bullet points, and same thing as Stacey, rehearsed it with my husband and said, how can we fine tune this? And I think, that prepared me for when we did Courage at Congress last year with the in-person meetings, and just having one of those meetings under my belt, and getting some of that education through the Courage at Congress sessions before that definitely helped me to feel more confident. And I think getting those under my belt then helped me bridge that next gap into the state level legislation, to be able to say, okay, I can reach out to my, state level people that, typically they live right in your own neighborhood. So it's even easier to get in touch with them. And
you, I think, I don't know, maybe intentionally slipped in some best practice there, as far as when you message your legislator, to put a little personal flavor on that message. That's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to read it. They're going to read it, but it's going to increase the likelihood that it's going to actually resonate for them at all. So
right.
Well done. Good job. Jill, so as you've told the group already, in your profession, you are a quote unquote advocate. So what was it like for a person that is very comfortable speaking to different kind of groups? Was that a different kind of conversation? Was it a different kind of preparation that you had to do? And then going forward from then, how did it feel after that?
I think so. I think it just, it's sad to relate, but I think it just added a little legitimacy in my early meetings, because I find sometimes legislators can be a little dismissive of parents, or they, not dismissive, but get they don't have the same gravitas, if you will, as somebody who's coming in with a legal background. So I feel like I had a little bit of an edge in that respect. But I really started, it's just funny to me that Heather started at the top at federal legislation and worked her way down. I did the opposite. The first thing I did was with my local school, of my school district. And again, one thing that I think is going to come up, you'll hear in a lot of my discussion, is about collaboration. Like I know many of you know, Stacey and I do a ton of work together, and I feel like I couldn't do it without her. And it's been that way for me since the beginning, because the very first meeting I went to, another parent said, you know, hey, I'm going to go to the local school district policy committee meeting. Do you want to join me and talk about food allergy stuff? And I was like, wow, I never would have thought I could go to a local policy meeting, but okay. So we did that. And then we were fortunate to work with them to come up with a food allergy policy for the district. And then I had a similar experience to Stacey, except it wasn't that I ran into somebody at a dinner party. Somebody in my support group came to me and she said, you know, I ran into this Nassau County legislator, that's our local county, at a dinner party, and I grabbed his ear and I'm going to go meet with him tomorrow about food allergies. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, yes. So we sort of fell into that one. And then I felt the moving up was a little easier for me, to start with the school district, then the county. And then I was fortunate to work on New York State's legislation for the Food Allergy Anaphylaxis Management Act to help protect kids in school. And then ultimately worked on the CDC guidelines. So for me, it was sort of each step up made me, I was a little more confident, it was a little easier each time.
I think that's a great point too, to draw out that you don't have to do this by yourself. Like there are enough people that are caring about your issues around you, and they're all going to have different levels of comfort, different levels of experience. Tag team a meeting. If it's your first time, you're going to get that opportunity. I think this week, as we do those meetings, a lot of times you're going to have people in there who have done this before, people who are, you know, more knowledgeable maybe about the policy. Take advantage of that. That's FAIR is here to make sure we can match you up. We'll find someone in your area that either has done this before, or maybe you're two beginners at the same time, but it's still easier to do it together than it is to do it by yourself. Not to say you can't do it by yourself, but just throwing that out there as an option for people to feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
So sort of, I think this is a good transition. Stacey, what do you advise people who want to get involved in advocacy, but find it daunting or overwhelming? What would you say from your position of having done this a while, but also remembering not that long ago that you were starting and felt that anxiety? What would you tell someone that's doing this for the first time?
Well, I think just like what you were saying, you know, there's a lot of comfort in numbers, right? And so find some other people in your community. I know that that's what Jill and I have done. You know, every year we go up to Albany, and every year our group gets bigger. And I can't tell you how much I've learned from Jill over the years. You know, you can hear me repeating things she says in the meeting, and you know, so I think it's reach out to other people in your community who have children with food allergies, who have food allergies, who might be interested in advocating with you.
Heather, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the keys is to start small. And I think, you know, especially if you're looking at trying to build relationships with either federal or state legislators or their offices, you know, start small and don't feel like, you know, it's really, you know, a longer process. It's not a sprint, it's more of a marathon, right? So thinking about how you can kind of spread out sort of those seeds along the way to help build that relationship, I think helps take away some of that kind of feeling of this overwhelming thing. And I mean, legislation doesn't really move really super fast. I mean, we kind of seen that. I mean, with the FASTER Act, just as far as it came within the last year is pretty incredible, but you know, that might not always be the case. So I would say, you know, kind of take it slow and don't be discouraged. You know, there's a lot of people that are in the same situation as you, and you know, don't be so hard on yourself if you feel like you can't kind of keep up a really quick pace on things.
I think that's a great point. And I don't want to say the word unprecedented, but the progress that FASTER Act did make in a session caught us all, not necessarily by surprise, but we were all extremely happy at how far it went. We're all, you know, sad that we're sort of starting from scratch here in this Congress, but I think that we now know that there's a receptive audience to it. And Heather, to your point, I think it's a good concept to wrap your mind around that. It could take a while. It likely will take a while. Almost always it will take a while. But don't try to hit a home run on your first swing with the staff and with the members. You want to make a relationship that can last you through this bill, however many sessions it takes, but also through subsequent bills. You want to become a resource to that office as the food allergy person. So I know my constituent, I know this person back in hometown, and I know that if there's an issue coming up that might affect the food allergy community, I know that I could reach out to them and ask a question. So that's what you really want to do. The bill is important, but really more important is positioning yourself as the person that they're going to reach out to, and like a trusted resource of information.
Mhm.
Jill, what do you think?
I couldn't agree more. I would reiterate everything that Stacey and Heather have said already in terms of going in numbers and starting small. But in particular, I just want to tell one story to your point, John. Our very first advocacy meeting ever, I would say, was when my daughter was entering kindergarten and we were having a meeting for a 504 plan with the school. And before getting to that meeting, my husband and I had we're both attorneys, and we had typed up an 11-page single-spaced document of all the accommodations we needed for our daughter. Most importantly was that she needed an aide. And unfortunately for our daughter, at that time, by age 3 or 4, when we were going to this meeting, she had anaphylaxis a number of times, and it was very serious. So, but something stopped me as I was walking up the steps to this meeting. Something made me say, I turned to my husband and I said, even if we get nothing on these 11 pages, even let's say it's something crazy and they say there's no EpiPens allowed in the school, let's just make sure that when we leave that meeting, we smile and we thank them and we become the go-to people that they go to. And in fact, that is exactly what happened. They denied my daughter an aide. And I wanted to scream and pound my fists and threaten to sue. And instead I said, thank you so much. I can sleep at night knowing that you feel so confident in taking care of my daughter that you don't feel you need an aide in the classroom. That brings me such peace and such happiness. And from that moment on, the school district came to me with any issue related to food allergies. They let me run Food Allergy Awareness Week. I worked with all the principals. So it's important to remember when you're advocating, even in a situation like that when you're starting small, but certainly also with the state and federal legislators, it doesn't matter if you get what you want at that meeting. It matters that you become somebody respected, that they will come to, like you said, that be the go-to person on food allergies.
Yeah, that's such a great way to say it too. I think there's no one wants to deal with someone that either has yelled at them or feels you feel a lot of friction with someone. And I think it's easy to let tempers run high when you're talking about something personal to you. And that's really what most of you are doing when you have these meetings. It's something that is deeply matters to you and is a life and death situation to you. So it's very, very important to realize that, you know, you're talking to someone whose job it is to hear you out, but they're also a person. And the best way to make sure that you form that relationship is to give them something. So if it's just a matter of, if it's information that you're giving them, that's great. If it's, you know, emotional understanding, that's great. You just want to build those links so you can come back to them later. That's how you're going to really get what you want.
Exactly.
We're going to reverse the order here so that Jill, that way you don't have to go last and have to, I feel like that's fair. At any level, so at the school level, I think this actually goes a little bit to your last answer too, but as you move up the line, not everyone is going to A, understand your issue, B, understand the severity or the importance of your issue, or C, they might understand it and they just don't agree with you, which is probably the hardest one. It's easier to educate than it is to turn someone 180 degrees. How do you recruit others to caring about your issue the way you do? What sort of, in your experience, what's the best way to either turn someone around or give them what they need to know so that they say, yeah, I hadn't thought about it. That sounds right. I agree. Or I had thought about it and this sounds better and I'm gonna go with you now.
I think there's a couple of things. The first one is, and I sort of alluded to it at that first meeting that I attended. It's an old expression my mom used to use, that you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So the first thing I counsel because I also run one of the support group leaders, the first thing I counsel everybody in my support group, whether they're advocating in their nursery school or in the federal legislature, is just smile and try to be collaborative instead of antagonistic. To me, that's really the most important thing, but also make it personal to them. So for example, I did a lot of speaking when my daughter was in elementary school to groups of parents who were not parents of food allergic children, like how to run a play date with a food allergic child. And that just, it's sort of is a way of getting in the door with people who normally don't care about this issue at all. But now they see a flyer come home and it's like, oh, I should make sure that I can safely host my children's friends. And then it's important to them. So when you make it important to them, that's I think the coalition building. And the last trick I would say, is use your props. And by props, I mean children, because I would say that every meeting I've had with a legislator has been more effective if my daughter has come with me. It's just that simple. You know, when the kids speak, they listen. And we had one meeting, it was actually the precursor to FAIR, when we took the kids to Congress when my daughter was just 5, so 14 years ago. And we went in, and I don't remember whose son it was, I apologize, but he looked at the legislator who had no interest in this and didn't want to talk about it at all and kept trying to change the subject. And he was, I think, about 6 or 7 years old. And he said, "Excuse me, Senator, you're getting off point. We're here to speak about food allergies." It just reeled him in. Once the little kid said that, he was like, "Oh yeah, I was trying to evade your issue." So use your props, use your children.
We might have to deploy that strategy. I had not thought about being so direct. I think that's great. Heather, what are your thoughts about sort of the best way to turn someone around or get them on board to your cause?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my experience, I haven't really faced anybody that's like kind of flat out said, like, you know, I don't agree with you on that, or, you know, I don't believe in food allergy or something like that. But it's more been that they really just don't understand it. So for me, a lot of it has been the education piece and figuring out how to communicate with them on a basis that they'll be receptive to. So for example, like within a daycare setting, you know, you go in and you're dropping your child off in the morning and it's kind of chaotic. You know, maybe that's not the best time to start talking about some of these things, but maybe you could say, "Hey, you know, I might come by at lunch today. Do you have a few minutes where we can sit down and talk?" And just kind of walk them through, you know, what you want to talk about there. I think the other piece for me would be with caregivers on the family side of things. That can always sometimes cause a little bit of tension when you're trying to explain things. So, you know, sometimes I feel like I can be a little bit more blunt and honest with family members. So, for example, you know, you have the example of a toddler taking a toy that has, you know, been in another child's mouth or been in a dog's mouth, and you don't know what's going on with there. Or food that's been prepared where it might have cross contact with something. You know, I bring up the example of, you know, if that had a chemical on it, would you want to put that in your mouth, or would you want that in your child's mouth? And that usually helps people kind of understand the severity of things. Like, you know, if that had something that was really toxic on it, I wouldn't want my child to put that in their mouth if it could cause harm to them. So I think finding some parallels that you can draw to get them to relate to things is helpful.
Stacey?
Yes, I agree with everything that Jill and Heather have stated. And it's a lot about educating. And I know I found whether it's going to schools or going into a legislator's office, people, when they hear about epinephrine, are always so nervous about the needle. And so I found that I always bring an orange and I have expired EpiPens, and I'll demonstrate to them exactly how it works, and then, you know, pull it out of the orange, and they'll see that you've never actually, you know, see the needle. And I just see the comfort level of, I've done this for camp counselors for the past several years, and all of a sudden people are so much more comfortable around, you know, using these devices. And it's the same thing. Like another example, I'll try to explain cross-contamination, and cross-contamination is a concept people sometimes don't really understand. And so I love to use the glitter example. You know, you touch some glitter, and then look, now I'm going to go touch this door handle, and I'm going to touch this pencil, and you can actually see how, you know, things can get cross-contaminated within a classroom after people eat lunch and whatnot. And so I just think that being able to make people really understand on a more personal level, you know, it helps with empathy and understanding.
So you guys all might not have an answer on both ends of this question, but I think it's important to set people's expectations. And I think it kind of goes to this last question as we talked about how to get people on our side. I want to talk about best and worst meetings that you've had that you can remember. Sure. I want to bring this up because I think that bad meetings do happen. Mm-hmm. They very rarely happen, but they happen. And you should understand what to expect when a bad thing happens. You're very unlikely to get yelled at. You're very unlikely to get told that you're lying or you're wrong, because remember, these people usually rely on you to vote on them to stay there. So that's unlikely to happen. But I wanted to sort of give everyone an opportunity to hear about both the great success stories, the feelings that you're going to get when you have a great meeting, and then also what's the worst that could happen. And then we'll talk through that. We'll start with you, Heather.
Sure. So I think actually last year at the Courage at Congress event, is kind of a good place to start. I actually ended up meeting with both senators and both state reps here from New Hampshire. So I had 4 meetings that day. So it was really interesting to kind of compare and contrast how they went. I think the one that went the worst, I could kind of tell that the staff member that I was meeting with as I was going through my story, there was something else on her mind and she just wasn't kind of fully engaged. And, you know, I get it. I mean, they're meeting with people all day long and they have, you know, a lot of other things on their mind. So my strategy was really to try to figure out how to kind of redirect the conversation back to the point at hand, which was, you know, advocating for Fast Track at the time. So I kind of tried to wrap my story up a little bit quickly there and then jump to the facts. And she was really interested in the facts. And then, you know, meeting with some of the other legislators, they were really interested in the story. And then when we started talking about facts and things, they're just kind of like, okay, do you have a printout of that I can just take with me? So I think it's for me, the strategy is really trying to read how those staff members or the legislator is responding to what you're saying and figure out the best way to use your time, because usually you are pretty limited on the time that you have speaking with them.
That is the single best piece of advice I ever give to someone who does lobbying or advocating, is that it's very similar to being a quarterback and looking at a defense and being like, oh, this play's not going to work anymore. I've got to call a new one now. So it's absolutely right that you start the conversation and you see how it goes. And if you're saying statistics and numbers and 7% of 35%, 32 million, and they just sort of glaze over. All right, fine. We're going to go heavy. We're going to push heavy on story. And that's where we're going to go. I think that's absolutely right. That's how it's effective. Because if you think every meeting they have, they're meeting with someone who's telling them that this is the most important issue in the world. It is the number one most important issue to your boss. So it's true in our case. However, that's what they're going to hear. So you have to figure out what beyond that, how do you knock down that next door? And the only way to really know, you can plan and you can come prepared with 9,000 things, but really it's about being a human and reading someone else and figuring out what's going to happen when you say X and how they're going to react. Stacey.
So I'll give you an example of a great meeting and also of probably the worst meeting that I think Jill and I have ever experienced. So a great meeting, a couple of years ago, we went with our children and a group of other advocates, and we proposed an idea about a school bus, drivers in New York State being allowed to administer epinephrine. And both the senator and the assembly member who we met with just kind of, they loved the children's stories and the children's reasoning behind why this was so important. And I mean, that was an example of something that went through in a year. Like Heather had said earlier, I mean, there's a bill, this teacher training bill that I told you I first approached that legislator about, I don't know, now was it 10 years ago? It still hasn't passed yet. But this
We're working on it.
Yes, exactly. But this school bus bill, it happened to be, the kids' stories to these legislators at that time were so moving, and they just grabbed onto it and they could completely relate. They had children and they understood it. In terms of the worst meeting I think we've ever been to with the same group of people, when we were advocating for this teacher training bill, we were before an assembly member on the education committee, and the kids all explained their reasoning of why they thought teachers should be educated and how to understand if a child was having a reaction, how to administer epinephrine. And she said to all of us, including the children, well, we don't need this bill until someone dies. So,
Literally.
and I'll never forget, because Jill's daughter Maya said, well, we need this bill because we don't want anyone to die. And so, so I have to say that was, probably one of the strangest experiences we had, was hearing her response. But, in all these things, you're educating, and you can only hope that you can move someone by your personal stories. So.
We're going to call that the black swan of outcomes. I think that's, if you looked at the curve, that one's way over on the right side.
But John, the good news is she's no longer the chair of education. And this year, the chair of education has been a co-sponsor of this bill for the past 10 years. So we're hopeful that New York State will finally get this.
There you go. Well, Jill, I can't imagine you have another worst one.
No, I don't. I don't have another worst.
But she was there.
Let's talk about.
Unfortunately, I share that. The best one I think ever was one that I walked in. And again, it's because I had met with this person before. And so this particular time when I walked into the meeting, this was on the state level. This is our assemblyman who actually just retired, unfortunately. But when I walked in, he looked up from his desk and he said, "What do you need me to co-sponsor?" And I literally didn't even have to say anything. I handed him whatever we were working on at the time, and he immediately co-sponsored all of them. So but that again, that wasn't just by coincidence, right? That was because I had been there before and he knew that I was an expert in this area. And if it was something that I was bringing to his attention, it was obviously something worthy of him co-sponsoring. So that was certainly the best meeting. And yes, I reserve the worst meeting was the same one that I was in.
So yes. All right. So I wanted to set the bands of what you could hope to experience. Probably not going to get a lot of that New York meeting on your virtual meetings here on Wednesday. But really so I do this work, right? Obviously I like it. But to me, there's an alchemy. There's like a magic that's going to happen in that meeting. You don't know how it's going to go. You don't know what the receptivity is going to be. You don't know if you're going to get a commitment to do something. But you get to find out each time. Every meeting is going to be different. You can prepare, but it's really just on the minute at the time. How's this going to go? So really, once you get past the stage fright, once you get past the first couple times where you're realizing this is a staffer that's taking notes about what I'm saying, and they're writing about my story, and that's the parameters of what's going to happen here. It could change a little bit within that, but it's unlikely to break into something else. Once you get past that and you feel comfortable with that, you really get to each meeting is like a whole new experience that you get to figure out how it's going to go. And at the end, you could get what you want. You could affect legislation that passes that makes people's lives better. That's you're playing with live ammo. It's really exciting and energizing. And that's obviously why I do it and why I hope all of you guys are going to keep doing it after this week and after you hear all these great stories about how valuable advocacy is. So what is a misconception you've had about the legislation? This might be a question. This might be an answer already, sort of about how long things take. 10 years, 1 year. But what's a misconception you had about the legislative process before you started getting involved in advocacy? A corollary could be, did you expect that you were going to meet with staff? Or do you think you were going to meet with members when you first started out? And then did you find that it mattered who you met with, or was one better than the other? We'll start with Stacey.
I think that the biggest eye opener to me was the way that politics really play into, advocacy. Because there could be a bill that, we all think is so important and all the members are signing on to, but at least at the state level, it's not moving because a chair of the committee that it goes before has to put it on the agenda. And even though it would get voted in, if it was on the agenda, if the person who chairs that committee decides they're not going to put it on the agenda, it will never move. And so to me, that was the biggest eye opener, that it doesn't matter how much support sometimes you have, you need to get the support from certain people. And so I think as we've gone through the process, after all these years, now we know who, for whenever there's a bill, we kind of try to target the people who are on that committee who will be able to who are the people who will make it get onto the agenda. And, it's kind of like knowing who the person is that you need to talk to. So.
And you really only glean that through experience. So that's just the way that goes. It's you could likely, if you're a volunteer advocate, you don't have extensive knowledge about internal politics of the state legislature. Like that probably is not what you do in your spare time and sort of figure out who likes who and who doesn't like who. But as far as your meeting goes, you have your mission is to win support in that room. Absolutely. And then as you go along and have more meetings, you can start to figure out you learn how to play politics in that state and figure out which door is important to grease. So I think that's a good point. Jill. Sorry, Stacey, follow up.
The only other thing I was going to say is the thing that's so important is the more people you're meeting with, you find out, there's so many different staff members that would say, oh, you know what, my cousin has allergies, my mother has allergies, and all of a sudden it makes your issue a little bit more important because they can relate. So that was the only other thing.
Good point. Jill?
Continuing with what Stacey was saying about the politics, I think it was eye-opening to learn about again, you have to have bipartisan support of a lot of this stuff or it won't go anywhere. And that was just so shocking to me to think that food allergies could be a partisan issue, I guess. So that was a little disturbing. But from a bigger picture, sort of the 10,000 foot picture issue of what I think that people have a misconception of is that you think that you can't make a difference because you're just one person or you're just one mom. And that to me was really the biggest eye opener, was that, oh, I could walk into this meeting and then this person will co-sponsor a bill and the bill will become a law, and then there'll be legislation on the books because I walked into it, not me alone, but you know what I'm saying? That I think that people feel like, well, I can't do anything. I'm just one person. What can I do? And so to learn that you really can do something, to me, that was the biggest eye opener, I think.
Absolutely.
That's the good thing about not everyone doing this, is that if by you doing it and then someone else not doing it, you can have more of an impact than someone who doesn't feel that they can make a difference. It's a weird sort of circle, but it is true. Heather.
Yeah, I think Jill, to your point about that, yeah, definitely, I totally agree with everything you just said there too. I wanted to touch on one thing, John. You kind of mentioned at the beginning of the question here, you know, expectations going into what a meeting is going to look like. You know, I wasn't really sure fully what to expect. You know, the first time I filled out a form on the website, I'm like, am I ever going to get a response? I don't know. Like, you know, maybe, you know, sometimes you get one of those generic emails back that says that there's, you know, on this committee and they're, you know, involved with X, Y, and Z. But, you know, I think when going into the DC meetings, you know, I wasn't sure if we were going to meet with legislators or not. And at first, when we were talking about, okay, we were going to meet with staff, and it was kind of like, well, is that really going to be as valuable? But just within, you know, my experience within just the last year here, I found that it's been hugely valuable. You know, I really thought that, you know, maybe they're not really listening to my issue and they're just taking notes and they're going to pass it off to their boss. But, you know, with some of the people that I met with last year, they've reached out to me to ask questions about things, or, you know, as soon as I've reached back, I've gotten an email back within, you know, 30 minutes sometimes. And so, you know, I think just knowing that, you know, these people do care about your issue, and sometimes, you know, they are pretty overwhelmed and they have a lot of other things going on, but they're humans too, and they're people too, and, you know, you can build that connection, and it doesn't have to be just this transactional, like, okay, here's my point of view, and kind of pass it on from there.
So I may have asked this question because it's my hobby horse and I wanted to make sure that I got an opportunity to talk about it, but I think that there is a big expectation that you're going to meet with the member, and the member is who you want to meet with. Members may want to tell you what you want to hear, and then leave the room. That's sort of what a politician wants to do. Is they never want to make a person feel like they've been said no to, but you can't always say yes. So sometimes you're doing something else that is neither a yes or a no, but it makes people feel like they were told yes. It's a bit of a long way to say this, but basically saying you want to talk to the staff, because the normal procedure and order of this is a new bill comes up. It's not necessarily a highly controversial bill or a bill that is just sort of baked into politics so that, you know, a politician's going to have an opinion on this issue before he even hears about it because it's just in there, like national defense or whatever, anything like that, that there's something already in his mind or her mind, and that's just that. This is something different. So the order is you meet with the staff, you explain the issue, you tell your personal story, you tell them the details about the bill and how it's going to make people's lives in their district better. And then you make the ask for co-sponsorship. So the staff member is going to write up a report on that bill. They're going to do research on the data that you brought them. They're going to talk potentially about your story in the bill to sort of put a human face on the issue. And it's going to go up the chain. It's very administrative and very boring, but that's the way it works. That's how you build up to that success. So if you meet with the legislative correspondent, or you meet with an aide, it goes up to the director, goes up to the chief of staff. And then they decide that they have a meeting with the member and say, here are the bills that we met on this week. I think this one's really, really important, and you should consider co-sponsoring. And then they're going to ask, who will be mad at me if I do this? And then the staff will already be prepared to answer that question, because that's their job. That's more important than anything else in that conversation.
So true.
Right.
And how much will it cost people? And how much will it cost people? That's the other.
Right.
Absolutely. So that's what you want to have happen. I think that a lot of times people just want that magic moment with the member saying, yeah, no, that sounds great. I think I'm sure the office will be behind that. I'm sure I'll be behind that. And then they don't, because that's just the way it works. So what you want to do is the best outcome is the one you're likely to get. You're likely to get staff. If you get a member, it's great. There are a number of stories that people can talk about where they were able to convince the member in the room that this is what they want to do, and they do it. But sometimes that isn't the case. And the way you can guarantee your best chance of success is to build that real strong base, give them all the data they'll need, drop FAIR's name, so that when they say, we have a real specific question about policy that You're probably not going to know who can we email at 1 a.m. about this. They want to have the easiest possible job in writing this report, but they want it to be the best that they can be. They want to impress their boss, who wants to impress their boss. So it's just like your office. It's just like anything else. So that's my hobby horse, because I think a lot of people have sort of, in my mind, sort of backwards expectations on who's important to meet with. So thank you, Heather, for giving me an opportunity to talk for 5 minutes about my hobby horse, because I don't know when else I'll get to do it.
I can actually, I'll add one more thing on that. One of the things going into this that I think I didn't really understand is how many different pieces of legislation that these people have in front of them, the senators and the reps every year. If you go on to, the congress.gov and look up what they're sponsoring, they could be co-sponsoring hundreds of different bills. So I think that gave me a little bit of perspective to understand why that process of meeting with a staff member and kind of going up the chain was so important, because there are just so many other priorities there as well.
I want to just add, if I could, two things. One to what John said, and one to something that Heather said earlier, actually. John, you mentioned the data, and I think that that's something really important that people should know as advocates, is that you should have your data with you. You should have what's called leave behinds. You should bring something in with you that has all the statistics on it. Read the room, of course, as Heather was saying. If they're bored by the statistics, move on, but make sure to leave it behind with them so they have it. But also very, very important, something that John mentioned briefly, if they have a question and you don't know the answer, don't make it up. Don't try to guess at something. Just say, you know what, we have people who can answer that for you. Here's the business card, call FAIR. And that's really what you want to do, because you don't want to ever give misinformation, because they will research it after you're gone, and then you'll lose credibility and everything.
Absolutely. That is a smaller hobby horse of mine. So I'm glad you picked that up. That's another really important one.
It's a little hobby mini horse.
Right. Exactly. It's a Shetland pony of a hobby horse. So we have 2 more questions that we were running up on time. I want to make sure that we get that. This is another leading question, so maybe you'll pick up on what I'm saying here. With a legislator or with staff, as you're having the meeting, what is the biggest value an advocate can bring to the meeting? Is it the facts and figures, which we said can be important, but what can they uniquely bring that no one else can bring? We'll start with Heather this time.
Obviously your story. I think that's pretty clear, is that, that's the thing that's individual to you. If you have a network of other allergy family members, friends, also sometimes sharing their story too can help. But that's the thing that's going to help them remember you and remember why that legislation was so important to you.
I mean, that's sort of the answer, but do you guys want to add anything to that?
Well, I was just going to say, they also, once they hear your story, that also gives them sometimes, a lot of the politicians like to have some publicity about a bill that they're sponsoring. And they love to be able to say, I'm doing this because I have a constituent who, has this going on. And so it gives them some color to be able to use to explain why they're pushing for a piece of legislation.
Yeah, that you will hear in any story you ever read about a member's support of a bill, there'll always be Tim from back home had this problem. So you always got to find who the Tim is. You got to find the anecdote, and you want to be the anecdote. And also to go back quickly to before what we said about the value of kids at these meetings.
That's what I was going to say. Yep.
So I'm sorry. It's just basically like a camera. If you ever want to see a camera come out faster, is be in a legislative meeting with a member and kids there. That for sure. You don't have to ask, can we get a picture? Staff has the camera out, they're ready to rock. That's going to happen. So that's a good way to make sure that you are getting the publicity out there for your issue and also for your organization. Jill, sorry if I stole your thunder there.
No, I was just going to say that's, something that we talk about as well, just in terms of the personal story is the most important thing that we can bring as advocates, but not just so much from us as the adults, but from the kids. I think that's even, stronger.
Can I add on to that?
You can.
And I think it's so important, I've been pushing my son since he was, 4 to come up with us to Albany and to DC. And I think it's so important for the kids, because not only are they learning to advocate, but it takes away from focusing on, I have this food allergy and kind of feeling bad, to look at, I can make a difference for my life and for everyone else's life. And so I think it gives them that confidence. And so it's helping them as much as it's helping the legislators.
And I've now been here long enough that I can chart your son's growth in doing that and tell you that he has grown and gotten more comfortable. And that makes me feel very old timer here at FAIR, but it's true. I can tell you that's definitely true. So this is our last question, and it sort of gives you an opportunity to sort of give your closing statement for some of us here comfortable doing that. But really, I just want to know, why do you keep doing this? What's the rewarding part of this? It's not, it's not something that's your full-time job, obviously, but it's something that you dedicate your time to. It's something that you dedicate your free time to. You're doing it now. You're going to do it later, or at this event that we're all at right now at this exact moment. What's the most rewarding part of this work to you? Jill, we'll start with you.
Well, it's twofold for me. I mean, obviously affecting change, right? That's what we're doing this for. So I was actually talking to Stacey about this earlier before the call that you alluded to with the school buses, seeing that press release when that bill was passed and knowing that her son Jared could now safely go on a bus. I mean, that's one huge part of why I find this rewarding, is when you actually help people with food allergies. I mean, that's obviously the goal. But on the other side, there's another side that I find very rewarding, maybe even more so. And that is what you were just talking about, like with Jared, is the same with my daughter, Maya, watching her become an advocate for herself. Because let's face it, the most difficult thing we as parents are going to do is relinquish this control over their food allergies to them as they grow. But the most important thing we can do is relinquish this control of the food allergies to them. And in doing so, not only the control of the allergies, but the advocacy. I mean, to see that we can lead by example and make sure that our children know that as they grow, they can be their own advocate and they can advocate for others. That to me is the most rewarding part.
That's great. Heather.
Well, I think, my son's only 2, so that is one of my end goals, is to, be able to have him be an advocate for himself and to help, role model that. But I think also just at this stage of, where he is in his food allergy journey and where I am, I think, being able to have basically the privilege of time to be able to talk to people about these issues and to share other people's stories that, might not be in the position to be able to do that. I think, that's really rewarding to me, and to help elevate, not just, my son and his food allergies up, but for everybody in the community, especially those that, might not have that choice or advantage to do that.
I just want to say one thing to Heather. They're never too young to advocate. I will tell you that when Maya was 3, we used to go into her nursery school every year and do a whole food allergy awareness week thing. And one of her little friends missed it. She was absent from school that day. And it really bothered me because this was her best little friend. And I really wanted this little friend to know more than any of the other kids about this. So I asked the teacher if I could come back the next day and speak just to this one child. And I will never forget, like it was yesterday, even though it was 16 years ago, Maya turned to me and she said, "Mom, I'm the one with food allergies. I can teach her all about food allergies tomorrow."
Oh, that's so sweet.
And I was like, "All right, you go, girl, you got this." Yeah. Even though you say he's just 2, he's listening. He's he's doing everything that you do. So just remember that.
Yeah, he actually brought me a package of food the other day, and he said, "Mommy, can you check the ingredients to make sure this is safe for me?" And I was like, "Oh, it's working."
Exactly.
Really,
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stacey, close us out.
So I think everything I completely agree with everything Heather and Jill said. And, I just think it's, being an advocate, you're being a voice, and you're educating others and helping to make the world safer and more inclusive. And I think that one of the most rewarding things, besides, making change, is learning to, becoming friends with all these other advocates who you're working with and learning from them. And I have to tell you, I always say, having food allergies, one of the best things that came out of it is the people that I've met in this community and how supportive everybody is, whether they work for FAIR or whether it's just a fellow advocate, a legislator. It's a really great community. So I feel lucky to be part of it. Not lucky to have food allergies, but lucky to.
Right. It's a silver lining. It's not necessarily, yeah. So Stacey, Jill, Heather, I appreciate you guys being here. I've lobbied with all of you. I've advocated with all of you before closely over now, some of you multiple years, and you're all great. I knew that you guys would be the perfect people to talk to about this. We're all at different stages of this process. And even when you've been doing it, even if you've been working for a bill for 10 years, there's still new things you can learn. There's still new ways new strategies you can deploy. You've had the meetings, but it evolves, and you only get better the more you do it. So thank you guys for joining. I think that everyone who's listening to this will have gained something, even if they've done a lot of meetings before too. And I hope that you learned something, and enjoy the next panel.